Hello everyone, we are back in Blender and today we're going to be focusing on using that skeletal structure that we made before to actually manipulate the way in which our character is positioned so that we can create things like idle animations and walk animations and run animations. But before we can walk, we need to know how to crawl. Before we can even crawl, we need to know how to weight paint, and that's what we're going to be doing today. So if I select my armature right here, I'll be in the pose mode, and then I'm gonna hit shift and then right click and select my mesh, and then I can go into the weight paint again. Remember last time I demonstrated this a little bit and showed you what happens when we move our character with the pose mode, and we're just going to talk about some of the tools that we can use in terms of applying this weight paint to our character. So I spoke about how red means there's more influence and blue means there's less influence. So there's pretty much zero influence on this part of the character coming from the forearm, except from on the tricep just back here. So we need to be able to change that. Now we have two brushes that we're going to be working with. One is called our add brush, and this brush adds more of an influence on the areas that we apply it to. So if I go back to the pose mode for our armature, you're going to see that things get a little bit gross because I've added an influence where I didn't want it to be. So we can correct this. So I'll just go back into weight paint, and we can take a look at the other brush we're going to use, which is what we used last time, and this is the subtract brush. And this subtract brush allows us to take all of that away so that there's zero influence on the chest. Our forearm should not be influencing our chest. If it is, we got a medical issue on our hands. And so I'm just gonna try subtracting all of that. It's being a bit funny with me right now. There we go. It seems that I've isolated it to a decent degree. Gonna do the same for the hand, just because I'm not really sure if I want this affecting this. Now naturally, just because it's attached to the forearm, it is going to be affected, but we don't want our hand to be solely affected by our forearm. That's a bit weird. Okay, so we've isolated that quite a bit, and we're going to work on that a little bit more. But I go over to object mode, select my armature and pose it around. There we go. We can go back into weight paint and see what's going on there. And it seems that there's not enough influence on a certain part of our hand for either bone, so it's just kind of sticking to where it is. So I'm just going to hit Ctrl Z a few times, and we can fix and touch up details just like that. So I'm going into weight paint again, and I can see there's pretty much nothing there. So I'm going to go over here, and oh, that looks pretty rough. The hand bone is really not pulling its weight. So we'll go to add, and I'm just gonna add more and more of that. I can change the size of my brushes here, so I can change the radius and I can change the weight. I'm just gonna keep the weight at 1 just because we don't really need it to be less heavy than that, and we don't want our wrist to be affecting how forearm kind of works. We want it to be very isolated. So I'm gonna change the radius to 15, and then we're just gonna go across. So accuracy on this brush, maybe it's my computer. I'm gonna put it down to my computer because it's usually my computer, but just the accuracy today is not quite doing it. So we just have to kind of compensate for that. Alright, I'm gonna skip ahead and move on to another section of our character, just to keep this from being boring, and then we'll talk about animations. Now that you've got your weight paint all over your character, you should be ready to start animating your character. And we're going to make a simple idle animation and demonstrate how these animations link in with Unity. The first thing that we need to do to link everything to Unity is to save it under the assets folder in Unity. So this Blender file needs to go under the assets folder, which is a pretty simple process. You just go to save as and then find your assets folder for your project and then save it under that, and you can see that I've got mine saved already. So I'm just going to demonstrate how to make a simple animation, and this is just going to be an idle animation. So it's going to have a little bit of head movement, a little bit of breathing, a little bit of ear movement, maybe a touch of the toe movement, something like that, arm swinging, anything just to make it look not dead. Firstly, we're going to go to this timeline over here and we're going to hit this little record button that says automatic keyframe. So every time we move our character around, there's going to be a keyframe made because of that movement. And so we don't have to worry about adding those keyframes in ourselves, and this will just be the method that we'll be following just because it will be nice and easy. So the first thing I want to do is have our character breathe a little bit. So I'm going to select everything from the shoulders and kind of mid-chest, and then I'm going to hit S and I'm just going to scale it up a little bit and then click, and there we go. So we don't really see any movement there because that has now become our default. So we want to bring it back to a different state. So I'm just going to select everything by double tapping A, and then I'll go to pose, clear transform, and then all. And then we return to our initial position. And I can do the same here, so I can go pose, clear transform, and then all, and we start off and we end. So we have a destination and we return from that destination, and that's kind of the pattern of how we do things in terms of animation. And so I'm going to do the same thing with the chest. I'm going to scale everything up and have our character breathe, just not as intense this time. So I'm going to do 1.005, and then that'll be a little bit more gentle. And then on this frame, we're going to go back to hit all. We're going to go back to that initial transform. And now we can duplicate what we've done here by going into what's called the dope sheet. So I click on this icon here and then I go to dope sheet, and in my dope sheet I can see nodes that represent the different frames of animation. This must look a little familiar to all of you because it's kind of what we work with in Unity in terms of 2D animations. So I can see the exact frame where my character inhales like that. So I'm going to press A to deselect everything. I'm just going to scroll up and down and see how many bones we're using, and we're only using those. So I'm going to hit B, select all of those, and then Shift D to duplicate, and I'm going to move it to 20, which should take us to 50 frames in, and then just roll through to preview that. Inhale, exhale, inhale, and then we can go back to our timeline, select everything, go to that last frame, clear transform, and we can preview it just by using those icons. And there we have it. It breathes, it lives. But that's pretty boring, so we're going to spice things up a little bit. What's one thing that our character could do? Well, they could swing their arms a little bit, maybe turn their head. So we'll start off with the arm swing. So we're going to go to this frame where our character's inhaled fully, and I'm going to select both of these just so it's kind of symmetrical. And I'm going to swing these forward. And then individually, I'm just going to bring them in so they don't morph as much. And then I'm going to bring these elbows forward again, morph it in, or pull it in. So up, oh, not that, up, pull that in, up again. Doesn't matter if it's asymmetrical, you know, natural things don't move in complete symmetry. So there we have it, and we can just look at that little arm swing that we do as our character inhales. What's something else we can do? Well, we're focusing mainly on these frames that are a multiple of 10. So let's work with multiples of 5. Okay, we can have our ears come in a little bit. So I'm just going to twist them in like this. And then individually, I'm going to make them come round. And remember, we keep resetting to this original form. So if we don't hold this right here, then it's just going to fold back to that. So that might be the desired effect. Yeah, just like a nice little ear twitch. And you know what? I'm going to have a single ear twitch right here. It's a nice big old one. And then when they do that, I'm going to have him turn his head towards the sound of whatever that is. And I want to prolong this head movement here. So with this head bone selected, I'm going to go back into our dope sheet. I'm going to take a look at what's actually affecting the head movement. So I've deselected everything a couple of times, and I've reselected the bone, and it highlights bone 17. And because of that, I know that it's bone 17 that I'm dealing with, and it's going to take a couple of other things with it. And so I duplicate this, so Shift D, and I'm going to move it by about 5 frames, just so we have our head hang in that position for a little longer. And then just scroll up and preview what that looks like. There we go. We have that head hang instead of kind of a nervous twitch. Then I go back to my timeline and just play it. We're not getting too much leg movement, so I'm going to pause this, just have the knees bend a little bit. So now I'm just doing tweaks. I'll just speed through this footage a little bit. Alright, well here's my animation. running at a glorious 10 frames per second because my computer cannot hack it. I'm not sure if you know already. I may have said it a million times over. But we're going to go over into this dope sheet again. And then we're going to go into Action Editor under the dope sheet. And we're going to call this animation idle. So this is where we get to name our animation. So I'll call it idle. And then I'm going to hit F so that it remembers this animation because I want it to save this animation. And then I'm going to hit File, Save, and something magical is going to happen in Unity. Once you get back to Unity, you should see your character represented with the name of the file underneath. And their animations will be here. Now I have multiple animations that I'm going to figure out how to clean out. But I have my idle reel animation here. Now you might encounter something a little tricky, which is that you can't actually see your animation, but it's probably just being hidden like that. So if you see this little header here, you can just pull that up and preview your animation just like this. Okay, so there I have my idle animation. And you might be wondering, how am I going to get that idle animation into my game? Well, we're going to go to Armature, and we've added a little prefab into our game, and that is our character. They're not affected by anything. They don't have a rigid body or a collider or anything like that. If I go to the game view, they're just to the side of us, so I'm just going to move them in front of us so that we can see them immediately. Alright, so we have our character in the game, but they're still not doing anything. And this is where we add an animator controller. So I'm going to right click inside of my assets folder, go to create, and then animator controller. I'm going to call this cat controller. And then I'm going to drag this over to CatLab and open up an animator window. So we're going to go to window and then animator. Take this tab down to the bottom so we can actually view things as we work on this. And then we're going to create an animation window. So we go to window, animation, and take that all the way over there, not there. And we can see that we don't have any animations assigned for our CatLab. And so what we'll do is we'll take this idle animation. While we have our character selected, we then select the animation we want and drag it into the animator. And so on entry, we're just going to go into this animation. And we want this animation to loop. And we can preview this animation right here. And it seems to be looping. So let's start the game and see what happens. Okay, great. Well, we saw a little twitch. In fact, I'll play the animation again. If I just move this around, then the animation plays out. We just need to loop this animation, which I'll show you in a second. But it seems like things are going pretty good so far. So I'll go to my idle animation. And then I'll go to edit. And we want to check loop time. And then hit apply. And then I can play my game. Then upon playing the game, we see that our animation loops, just as we'd want it to. And there we have it for today. Sorry that the light isn't quite where we need it to be, but we can see that our character is in our game and they're animating. And soon we'll be able to take control of this character, add a run cycle to this character and add a text and all that good stuff. This has been a bit of a marathon for me. Thank you for bearing with, and I hope you picked up some really important and skills from this part. I'm going to try to follow an upload schedule of 2 for this series and 2 for the other thing, a little extra on the side next week. But until then, I hope you all keep well, and thank you again for watching.